So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining and welcome to the session. My name is Christina Joby Maria, and I'm a junior consultant at Turner and Townsend. We are joined today by Louis Hyde, consultant from Turner and Townsend. Louis is also the delivery support manager for Social Housing Fund. The purpose of the event: this is a retrofit information, support, and expertise event, which is fully funded by the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero and delivered by Turner and Townsend. The format of the event: there will be a presentation followed by plenty of opportunity for questions and discussion. The event will be an hour long and we will finish on time. Please keep your microphones muted and cameras switched off during the presentation. The slide deck will be made available after the event in a follow-up email to everyone that attended today. There will be a clean recording of this and all other masterclasses in the resources section of the RISE website. We will provide all our useful links in the chat. Please ask questions in the chat function as we go, or there will be an opportunity to ask questions directly after the presentation. And finally, there will be a quick poll and a word cloud at the end of the session. Please complete them to help us understand the level of knowledge in our topics. Thanks everyone again for joining, and I will now hand over to Louis to start today's presentation.
Thank you, Christina, and welcome everyone. As Christina said, my name is Louise. I work at Turner Townsend and on the RISE support delivery. So a little bit about myself as well. I previously worked in a local authority delivering retrofit projects such as LAD and ECO and so on. I've also got a background in energy and sustainability in general. I'm trained and qualified as a domestic energy assessor and a retrofit assessor. And I've worked in sustainability for about 6 years now, and I've also got a background in architecture as well, so bringing that to the support that we can offer. I'm excited to present this today. We are going to be running through beginning your project in terms of the stock analysis that you can do, and then talking about target outcomes. These will mainly be around the SHF requirements. However, we can talk a little bit more generally around any retrofit project if that's helpful. Then we can talk about how you can identify those target properties, and then moving on to the design and risk assessment stages. So we'll start with the very beginning in terms of why do we need this? Where does this start? So we know that each property is unique, and therefore a retrofit assessment is required for each property, and there's different approaches that you will then have for your procurement, the cost and variation. You want to make sure that when you're going out to tender, you're awarding a contract, that you've really covered the details and specifics of what you need from the contractor, that they're appropriately qualified for the right measures. This can affect, cost, and where this is grant funding money for the Warm Homes Fund, this will then affect delivering to targets and how you spend the grant funding. It could also change, the project stages, which is important. And it can also help you plan around risk and all around just make sure that project can go well and on time. There's also the aspects of complying to the policies and standards for government funded schemes. This is typically around PAS and Trustmark and MCS where required as well. However, you might also be co-funding or doing more. In addition to the basic requirements of your project, you might be doing a co-funding element and so on. You might be doing more, in which case there might be other additional targets and also standards you might be working to yourselves, depending on your retrofit project. But essentially, begin with the stock analysis, and this is where we're going to look at some examples of some softwares. I'm sure a lot of you in the call will have your own software that you use, and you maybe also have commissioned some sort of third-party software. You maybe use stock condition surveys and so on. And again, when we say that we're deciding the target outcomes, today's session is mainly going to be in line with the Warm Homes requirements, the Social Housing Fund. However, again, I'm happy to talk about some other target outcomes that do exist in the retrofit sector. And there are other sessions that are focused on the local grant that I can make you aware of. I'm happy to talk a little about them at the end as well. If that's helpful to anyone, just let me know. And also, we're going to talk about identifying those properties and moving into design and the risk assessment. So step one is the stock analysis. When we talk about stock analysis, what do we mean and what are you looking for? Really, if you're own social housing, you will have certain legal requirements you're having to comply with. You're having to do the gas safety checks, Legionella. There's all these different compliance checks, and therefore you might have your own internal housing maintenance database, where you have records of everything to do with, asbestos, health and safety, the gas safety checks, and you might have windows replacement scheme, roof replacement schemes, information of this knowledge. People tend to commission stock condition surveys in addition, and this can really vary depending on your situation, depending on your housing stock as well, and how accurate that data is. But it can really it can range. It can be anything between sort of 5 to 10 years. People then they also have the legal requirements to have EPCs for the social housing stock as well, and you might also have your surveyor, building surveyor internal knowledge. But we're really talking about what construction style it is, what age band it is, the condition, even to the down to the element where we're talking about a solid wall property, or if it's a cavity wall, what if it's a cavity that is unsuitable for cavity wall insulation. Some of this information you can get on your EPC SAP data, and then other times you might need to commission that further detail. Then we can move into a bit of software we're going to look at in a minute. It's looking at sort of carbon profiling, and really this is going to give you the ability to sort of model different scenarios. But you want to know what the heating system is, really like what type of boiler and how efficient it is. This type of information can help you start to plan your project in terms of, well, if you have, it comes into asset maintenance as well. If you have a certain amount of boilers, like 50 properties of a certain type of boiler that might be due for replacement and it's X efficiency, they might be suitable to upgrade and move on to heat pumps. All this type of information will help you form the project itself. There's also other elements to this as well. You're just talking about buildings here and your actual stock, but we've also got the other sort of socio-economic factors. Where are these properties? Who lives in them? And you might have other reasons to sort of form the project, and lots of factors might come into this. Your budgets as well, in terms of how can you get the most out of warm homes funding. I'm assuming a lot of you will be working to the net zero 2030 targets, or maybe a bit later, maybe 2040. And you'll be looking to see how can you achieve the most that you can with that funding. This is an example of parity here. Other softwares, are available. You can use different ones. You can kind of see here, this is like you can have a basic dashboard at the start. You can model the EPCs, how many properties are in each band. And then you can start to, say if you got to meet EPC for all your properties by a certain date, you can start to toggle around, play with the software, change, well, what have I wanted done by this date and what have I wanted done by this date? And that can really then inform your decisions. You then, if you're sort of a sustainability officer or an energy officer working at a social housing provider or perhaps a local authority, you can then go with confidence to your seniors and say, you've got an asset management team, and you can say to them, this is what we need to do X by X date, and it's going to cost this much. And if we don't do this, then we're risking these properties not meeting the requirements, and therefore, maybe loss of income and rent and things like that. Then we have other characteristics you can see here. I'd appreciate it as a tiny bit small on screen. You will get a copy of the slides, and I suppose some of this is for sort of illustrative purposes to help you see. One of the things around this is it's quite an easy way for you to toggle around to make sure that property and information in a spreadsheet is one way to visualize things, but having it in a dashboard can help you slice and dice, chop and change, toggle around in different ways. And you can see here that there's things the bottom left and the top left as well. They're showing the average CO2 emissions in tons per property type. So you can maybe toggle that around the band, the construction type, the EPC rating, all these different factors. And that there's no really right or wrong way. We are going to talk a little bit around, warm homes is guided on fabric first and value for money in some respects as well. However, if you wanted to look at your carbon emissions per band of property, that could be a way that you're looking at this. You might then overlay that with some of your previous projects, and you might then overlay that with a map of what makes sense versus what your contractor can do on pricing for a measure mix. You might then take all that information. So you might take CO2 per archetype. You might take what went well on a previous project. what your contractor can offer you, and what the geographies are, and these might be all the factors that you take into consideration to start to plan the project. There's also a little bit here around things like the wall construction. I think this is really useful in terms of and your contractor as well will also, they might even have their own software where they help price it for you. It could be part of their offer. Sometimes there's quite a lot of companies that will offer the data analysis for you because they actually need to know the accuracy of it, the properties themselves, to be able to accurately cost the project, because it's a risk for a contractor really to offer a certain price when they don't really know the certainty of what your properties are. And for them, sometimes they offer this maybe as additional price, maybe inclusive, depending on the contractor really. But there's incentive for both sides really to know the accuracy of the property data. So this is another way you can look at it as well, uninsulated walls and so on. And maybe some of the things you've got to think around here is, you know, there might be some limitations to some software, as we talked about earlier, is what if there's sort of cavity wall insulation that needs extracted. I think it might need to move or the lights might turn out. There's the part where what if there's sort of failed insulation that needs to be replaced? What if the cavity is too narrow, and therefore traditional cavity wall insulation might not be suitable for that property, and you might have to do EWI. Sometimes as well, you can get cavities which are not really straight up and down, they taper or they're uneven across the property. And obviously a cavity wall installer should also make sure that the property is actually suitable if they're going to be installing cavity wall insulation. Mapping as well, all the information that we can see here, you know, you can actually then maybe visualize that in a different view, start to see how does this look in map form. Again, this is just another example of helping you see that all your property in a spreadsheet versus all your property in a dashboard or a map can be very beneficial. And I would say, you know, please don't feel concerned if you don't have a map. You know, not everyone has done this yet, but if you are sitting there with your project planned and you've not quite done the mapping stage yet, they're not essential, but something to think about to see whether that would help you. And just out of interest, I suppose, is to see, well, if you did that, would that change any of your approaches? Again, that is a 2D map, so thinking about, you know, sort of large scale, there could be a change in cross section or topography as well. And this is a bit more kind of basic example, but yeah, where the SAT bands are. Again, this can just be a really helpful way to visualize your compliance as well. Again, going back to that senior management, keeping track of the overall part. Again, I suppose not, you know, EPCC, meeting that as part, helping you meet part of one policy, but that's your EPC requirements. And then you've also got to think, well, where does that then fit into in terms of helping us meet net zero? Because you know, they're not necessarily interchangeable, and there might be more to be done. Then we talk about deciding target outcomes. When we talk about deciding target outcomes, it can be various things. We can talk about EPCs, it could be social value, reducing fuel poverty, improving the supply chain in terms of building capacity. There's so many different targets that might come into your situation and your circumstance. So let's discuss the warm home ones first, and please do bear in mind if you've got other considerations, then that's absolutely fine. You can find ways to weave them into the project. The Social Housing Fund, as you'll know, is primarily designed to get EP properties from below an EPCC up to a C. That is the main condition of the fund. There are some allowances for if you cannot reasonably reach that within the cost caps. You know, you have to evidence that and model that and show that. And I would see there's a quote there on the screen, but there's also, you can refer to that in the guidance as well. So in previous waves, there was, you know, 90 kilowatt hours per meter squared heating demand considerations. This is not applicable anymore, but it can be something as well that if you wanted to take on board as some sort of additional measure, that could be up to you. As I mentioned, the fund is designed to take properties up to an EPCC. So if you do want to go above that, then you can do, but it'd be with your own funding. And to, I suppose, to avoid any confusion, it shouldn't be included in your application, but that, I suppose, has already been submitted anyway. There are other considerations, so fuel poverty, reducing fuel poverty, making sure that bills are not going to increase as a result of the works. So there is some sort of modelling to be done on that as well. And then if you that might need to look then in terms of making sure that obviously the actual energy price caps and unit rates for energy can go up, but we're looking at the unit rate of heat demand as well, or electricity demand, making sure that that's not increasing. Then we also have on the right there, so the three other key elements really are that your projects have to comply with PAS 2035. The 2023 version is now live as well. Measures are to be installed to PAS 2030, and then installers should be registered, and all the measures should be lodged via Trustmark. These things are really, and if MCS is applicable, so that's the Micro Generation Certification Scheme. These things are really important because you need to make sure when you do your procurement that the installers are competent in this area. It needs to be priced accordingly and costed in terms of how much time it's going to take. It will affect your project plan. Your project plan can then be mapped out in stages of the PAS requirements as well. So that should all be really understood early doors. You might also then want to decide what kind of roles you would want internally as well, and how much you're going to give to a contractor. How are you going to assure their accreditations or qualifications? How will you check this? And so on. So the approach to retrofit, we also see typically with government funding, public money, there is typically some element of the value for money, but it's not just about that. There is also parts in the policy documents you can read in the guidance on social value considerations around supply chain and other aspects. But in general, we're talking about a least regrets approach to retrofit. And you can see that the challenge fund applicants have to quantify the mix of measures they're intending to install at the phase request stage as well. There's low carbon heat incentives as well and uplifts, and we can go into the cost caps briefly as well. But this can be a bit of an incentive to look at properties. There's a version for off the gas grid and on gas grids. There is also some thresholds to consider. Please do, if you're unsure about anything, please always check the guidance. But essentially, the amount of non-social homes you can have within an application, the amount of homes that can be included in an application that are above an EPC band C, as well as kept quite strictly as well. So please do consider that. And any non-social homes within a block or a terrace. This is actually quite a change from some of the previous policy schemes and so on. And the reason the policy change here is really to try and make sure that if there is a large scale block or project that can go ahead, and for example, there's maybe like one leaseholder in it, or there's one EPCB in it or so on, that can help the majority of the project go ahead and not withhold or hinder any development of improving other properties that need it. So hopefully that is a very welcome change, and that people feel like that gives them some more flexibility to design their projects. So please do bear that in mind, and it is worthwhile if you do work in a consortium. I would also just be wary, or not wary, that sounds a bit negative, let's say conscious, to think about how you're going to spread any percentages between your members. If you've got some members that tend to have more blocks or more geographically spread than others. So that is something to consider as well. We won't spend too much time on this because it can be covered in the guidance, but yeah, you can see that there's base cost caps and the co-funding requirement as well, and that there is an off-gas grid low carbon heat incentive, and there's an on-gas grid low carbon heat incentive. There's also lots in the guidance you can look at in terms of certain measures around, in particular, which measures are SAP approved, and how to navigate that in terms of heat with different types of heat pumps, and there's bits around heat networks in there which are worth keeping up to date on as well. Then we're going to talk quite briefly actually on identifying your target properties. And it's now time to choose these. You can find a subset that suits you in the funding intent. If we go back as well briefly to identifying other target outcomes, everything we discussed there, let's go back to that just now. The target outcomes, everything we just discussed there was to do with warmer homes. If you do have other retrofit projects that you're going to do alongside your social housing fund, you might have other aims that you want to achieve. There's lots of things out there, different standards. You might want to integrate these, or you might be running some sort of eco project alongside that. You might also be delivering the local grant, the social grant, and some other co-funded or your own funding project at the same time. If you are doing something like that and you have different sort of levels, you might be working to some sort of heat demand target. There's different standards out there as well. I would just bear in mind that all of the government funded ones, you do have to comply with PAS 2035 and use Trustmark, and the reporting will be done in a certain way. It's not to say though if you want to go above and beyond and do more in other ways, you can maybe integrate even local initiatives that are to do with more of a social aspect. That could also be integrated into your scheme. And there's so many great examples out there of what you can do. We do peer presentations. I can drop the link in the chat to this, but it's where you can see other organisations and what they do. So it can be things to do with monitoring and evaluation. That they've started to put different monitoring equipment in. It can be teaming up with a local charity to deliver some sort of initiative. It could be working with a university to do a research piece. If you want to use these to complement your warm homes project, you can do that. It's good to think about these things at the very start of your project, especially if you do want to do some research elements, working with a university partner. Consider that they've got different funding rounds that they have to go through, timelines that they work to. So you want to plan that out and decide that early doors to coordinate into your project. Okay, so essentially identifying those target properties. I think I'm going to go back onto a little bit of what I said earlier on. Those target properties are going to be a real mixture of what your data tells you, maybe what previous projects you've done, the local knowledge, meeting the scheme requirements, and then what your contractor has provided as well in terms of the pricing and what you can achieve out of this. All of these things can help you sort of fine tune and identify those properties. I would also say that once you've identified which properties you want to do, the area that you want to do them in, you can also think about, backup contingency properties, going out and doing sample retrofit assessments of certain archetypes. So say you've got, I don't know, 3 or 4 different archetypes in the project, you'd maybe want to go out and get retrofit assessments done for those. And also potentially do like an over-the-door check if possible, anytime their surveyors are going out in that area for any other reason, as to whether you can do a bit of a condition check, pre-install survey. Could also be maybe not be as formal as that. That might be the next stage, but really just to understand, what if you think that property is suitable and you go to it and there's actually some sort of, I don't know, really like large obstruction in the way that would be some sort of enabling work, and you can maybe then decide, do I want to include this in this phase, or if it has an enabling work, is it going to take longer, and will that then need to be included in a later stage of the project? One more thing that we've not really touched upon yet would be to consider any listed buildings or heritage aspects, especially if you're quite a mature, experienced organisation, maybe you're quite experienced in retrofit, maybe you've delivered quite a few waves so far. It could be the case that, you've done the low-hanging fruit, you're now left with some really difficult to treat properties. There could be quite a large group of organisations actually who are really in the same position, where you've got those difficult to treat properties, and maybe they need more specialist contractors, maybe they take more time, maybe you need to engage with your planning department. These types of considerations should all be thought about at this stage. Then we have what we call preliminary design, and this is about considering ease of access to the property, compiling the existing data, and moving forward with the right team and who's going to do what. So understanding, where do your retrofit assessors and designers come into this, and coordinators. We've got lots of different PAS masterclasses you can look at as well. Let's go into that in a lot more detail if that's helpful. We can post that in the chat as well. It's kind of some basics here around what software modeling requirements you might need. And thinking about the ongoing maintenance is also something that's really valuable to do. And bearing in mind though, that really once you've just all these measures, if it is a heat pump, where does the ongoing maintenance come into this? So I think a lot of contractors, housing providers, you might want to commit to one model to make it easier. Say it's an air source heat pump, to make the maintenance and repairs a bit easier. If you're having to commission repairs for the next 10 years of lots of different types of technologies, that means I need a bespoke or approach to each one. or a different contractor to maintain each one. These are things to think about as well. And at this stage as well, maybe you're thinking, I'm just looking to deliver this warm homes project and meet the requirements and get it delivered, and I'm not ready to think about the maintenance yet. It is always good to think about that now, especially if you're delivering this through, if you're a local authority and you're delivering this through an energy team that sits separately to your maintenance team. That is going to be the first question that they're going to ask you, as to, once you've installed this with your grant funding, who's, you know, you're then going to hand it over to us to do the long-term maintenance on, and they need to be included and told all about it at the start, so that when it comes to that maintenance aspect, that they are ready and involved. So that would be another tip, is to include all teams and stakeholders that you need involved in this project early doors. So the maintenance team should have real input. You can do a RACI chart, so that's like responsible, accountable, what's the third one? I can't remember the third one, and informed. We'll move on then to the step 5, which is the risk assessment. So we've got a few stages here, which I will go into, and I think some things should pop up in a second. So there's some of the risks that you can see around the assessment stage. Happy to discuss these more in the chat afterwards, or if you've got any other thoughts. But the assessment stage, really how accurate your retrofit assessment is at the start is going to have a knock-on effect to everything in the delivery parts. It really is really important for that to be really high quality. So that's really important to understand with your contractors. Make sure that that you really trust their experience, and that any kind of initial teething issues, if they're not quite right, make sure that's really ironed out at the beginning. The retrofit assessment needs to be of a standard that the coordinators and designers feel happy using it. But yeah, the risk around that could be that really there's knock-on effects throughout the rest of the project. The savings, the modelling could be too optimistic as well, so to bear that in mind. And some of the things you can do to mitigate that risk, really, I can mention a few of them there, but it's to ensure the quality is done in your tendering and procurement processes. Make sure the right training qualifications and certifications are in place. And that can be not just checking that, but understanding their experience of working on grant-funded projects before, working with PAS before, and maybe you can do soft market testing as well to see who else has worked with this installer, and how do they feel. It doesn't always have to be the really formal tendering feedback, and looking at that, you can try some sort of softer approaches and market testing to see how the feedback is. The software that you use, complying with all the different standards, so Retrofit software has to be complied with as well. And then we're going to move on to the actual design part as well. So design risk, you could have a poor retrofit strategy. The measures might not be wrong. Overheating as well, so that's actually been highlighted as a part of PAS, is to be considered in the future as well. Communication between the different parties. I think talking here about the general risk between each one of these stages, assessment, design and installation, it can actually, the flow and the communication between the different parties is really important. And understanding as well, say the new PAS has got, ventilation strategy requirements, thinking about that as well. Then we have actual installation. I mean, your contractor as well will have really strong awareness of this, but it's good for you to have some level of understanding. Is basically, I'd say installation risk could be making sure you understand all the different subcontracting parts as well, and who's going to go check things on site. So some of the things you can do to mitigate this is, sampling certain amounts of installs, really kind of strict or proper and professional contract terms that if something is not done right, there's a clear line of action as to how that is resolved. That goes for both parties, both sides. If the contractor's not happy with you, if you're not happy with them or something that they've done or something that you've done, there needs to be a clear contractual resolution in place. And that can be, your service level agreement that you both sign up to. That is to as well, to avoid any scope creep of, you're asking them to give things that they didn't know they had to provide and it wasn't costed for. So the installation, there can be basically co-bridging, thermal bridging, and Suppose residents being unhappy if it's left in a state as well. Monitoring and evaluation comes into this in a big way as well. There's a requirement with PAS that you have to go back to the property to ensure that it's achieving the intended outcomes. And that is all about making sure that whatever you were set out to do, whatever you modeled to do and installed for, is actually in practice being achieved. I think it's quite a welcome and great addition to add into PAS, is to make sure that there's some sort of mechanism in place. And that gives customers a bit of reassurance, as well as to know that there's this standard being used. Operation. So again, kind of touched on it there. There is the handover procedure in place, and the follow-up part in place of the PAS is that you have to make sure that it's achieving the intended outcomes. There is also a requirement in PAS for residents to have a handover. So in a practical level, I would say the PAS guidance might say you are required to give a handover to residents. I'm not really sure in terms of whether that then goes into really prescriptive detail about how you give that handover, but I'd say there's a real practicality there to consider about what the PAS guidance says in terms of you must give a handover and what you actually do. Because you've got to think about how the fact that certain residents learn in different ways and understand things in different ways. And it could be a bit overwhelming if you're in your house and you've never had a heat pump before, you've only ever had a boiler, and someone's coming in and you're just one job with the 5 jobs they're doing that day, and they need to get their handover done. Maybe they're giving it all quite quickly and verbally to you. Maybe there's no follow-up pamphlet. That could be what's going to happen in those situations, are that customer is then just going to end up calling back and saying, I don't understand this. So to reduce that, and that's like a sort of failure demand, and you want quality and value demands. So you want the customer to understand what's being used and to understand how to use that technology, really from a sort of moral fundamental well-being point of view, as well. So you want to make sure that you are explaining it, I mean, ideally verbally, giving them some sort of written material, and making sure that they know even before the measure is installed kind of what the technology is as well. That should be all kind of communicated early doors. That can also help reduce the risk of dropouts and things, because you don't want to kind of overpromise that you've signed up to the scheme, you're guaranteed to get solar panels. Things like that can be, you can really lead to disappointment for residents if they think they're getting a certain measure. It kind of needs to be communicated that they'll have to have the retrofit assessment done, and they can't guarantee what specific measures really will be proposed for that property until you've had the assessment done, and that will determine what measures can be included, in case they're getting their hopes up thinking that they're going to get solar panels and actually it recommends a heat pump and they don't want a heat pump, things like that. There's things on here around, condensation and mold, and controls not being used correctly. So controls not being used correctly, mitigations you can have for this are, making sure that the different formats are catered to. So verbally, written, can you send them a video? I'd also think about the long-term use of some of this. If you've got tenant changeover, handover, what if you're only giving something verbally? Once that tenant leaves that property and a new tenant comes in, you've got to think about how will they know how to use this new technology. So thinking about a welcome pack, can it be included there? Considering residents who maybe don't have internet access or not used to using the internet as well, in some ways you could do QR codes and you could scan your heat pump and it could come up with a video and show you how to use it. But not everyone will be able to access that. So thinking about all the different formats is really important as well. We are actually coming to a bit of an end, so I think that's going well timing wise for hopefully everybody. So I'm going to move on to resources. So we'll wrap up in a minute. Let's cover some resources quickly. We do have you can go to the RISE website and see all the different learning sessions that are available. We don't just do master classes, there's lots of different types of learning formats. We do podcasts, we do advice packs. Advice packs are the written guide, so that can suit you if you can't attend something live or you need a static format to look through while you're doing other work. We've got a few sessions coming up with guest speakers. So we've got the Embedding Successful Retrofit projects with Amplis, and we've got Importance of Resident Engagement with, I think that's Acuity. A little bit small there, but that's fine. We do have resident boot camps as well. We've got the PAS 2035 2023, what's new, and please do share them with any of your team relevant appropriate members that might want to attend them. And really, there's a few more on-demand resources. You can go onto the RISE website. We've got playlists as well. You can view, there's one on resident engagement, there's one on data, lots of useful resources for you. And really, I'm just going to move on to questions now. And Christina's going to launch a short poll, but I will go back onto the agenda slide and do a recap as well. So while Christina launches the poll, I'm going to do this recap for you, and then we can move on to questions. You'll all be unmuted, and you can come on, turn your videos on if you want to introduce yourself and so on. But really today we're just talking about stock analysis that you can do, looking at archetypes, looking at the construction type, looking at the age band or the EPC band. You can model the carbon of certain types of properties. You can use all different types of softwares. You can do mapping. You can look at stock condition surveys. You can look at EPC data, SAP data. You may be using some sort of third-party software. Then when we talk about the target outcomes, we touched upon the SHF target outcomes, which are around bringing that property up to an EPCC, reducing fuel poverty, social value within your project or supply chain, helping SME suppliers, and also complying with a trust mark past 2035 and past 2030 requirements and MCS where it's relevant as well. Then they had ways to identify the target properties, can be again through some software, modeling and mapping, and going back to using data that you have available, previous projects that you can learn from as well, consulting sort of senior management, asset management, and then what your contractor pricing comes back as. Preliminary design, so that's the retrofit assessor and a coordinator. Really the importance of that being right lies really in the procurement. If you've not worked with any contractors before, maybe don't have experience in that area, then yeah, it's really important to pay attention to that and get really high quality. Hopefully, if you have worked on a retrofit project before in some way or previous waves, then you'll maybe know whether they're experienced and high quality, delivering to that standard. And then risk assessment, all those different areas. How can you reduce risks of, failures and complaints of the technology or residents not understanding things? So that was everything I wanted to cover. And I'm now going to open to the floor, see if anyone's got any questions, and we'll stop the recording just now so that people can come on. Let's do that just now. But yeah, thank you very much. And you can contact the RISE inbox if you have any further questions as well.